Good evening, everyone. After that excellent talk by O, I'll be telling you about what exactly endocrine hygiene means and what its spectrum is. Okay. So this is the definition done by Karl Russer et al. Conditions and practices that help to maintain health and prevent the development of endocrine and metabolic diseases. Now, after reading this, I wasn't very clear what exactly is endocrine hygiene, where it starts and where it ends. So, to the best of my understanding, I thought, like any spectrum, it must have a starting point, an ending point, and something in between. But everything must culminate in some change in the hormones. That is what endocrine hygiene means to me. So, after looking at what endocrine hygiene means, while preparing for this talk, I just read a few articles, and boy, it was like looking through the rabbit hole. That was you can think of me as that proverbial rabbit that's looking down the hole. There were pages and pages of content. And basically, endocrine hygiene is so vast a concept that is so all encompassing that you might be able to argue about anything and everything to be endocrine hygiene. In order to narrow down this concept, we need to have some anchors, and I would start with WHO definition of health as my starting point. WHO defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. We need to have all three domains to be considered healthy: physical, mental, and social well-being. Now, before we go into what endocrine hygiene is and what we can do about it, it is important to remember that this whole talk hinges on this concept of nudging. Nudging is uh, paternal libertarianism, or in simple words, doing right should be easier and doing wrong should be harder than the status quo. That is the direction that we will be moving towards. And in that direction, we will look at physical, mental, and social health and what we can do to improve these things and endocrine hygiene per se. When we think about physical health, there are three things we need to do: what we eat, how we move about, and how we sleep. This is Revelation chapter 22, verse 2 from the Bible. The leaves of the tree are for healing of the nations. It was known way back in those days, thousands of years back, that food and medicine are almost inseparable. And that is why today we have the movement of moving from pharmacy to pharmacy. And in order to improve the health of our population, we need to look at endocrine hygiene in these aspects: how to educate our people to get the right kind of food, how to regulate the industry in terms of food processing, what can we do to go one step ahead of the status quo in fortification of food, and just as I said before, we need to uh, make the good things easy and the bad things hard, and part of it is limiting the intake of tobacco, salt, and sugar. Some of the common things about food and school interventions include going to the canteen and seeing what kinds of food are there. Incidentally, the background is my school Betty Seminar in Pondicherry, and we had a nice canteen. And uh, looking back, some of the food there was not necessarily very good, and therefore some of the interventions can include teaching kids what is healthy food, the whole food cycle, going with a cooking class, which is an absolutely necessary survival skill for both genders. And that means going against the tide, making it important to ensure that every kid learns basic cooking at least, and therefore they understand the nutritional value of food. The next step is, of course, fortification. We have vitamin D fortified laddu to vitamin D fortified milk, but not all fortification needs to be food based. This is life saving dot or Jeevan Bindi that has been pioneered in India, where the Bindi gives iodine supplementation to tribal women who are iodine deficient because they live in hills and iodine deficient places. So, fortification is one such way we can improve endocrine nutrition. And the last is limiting the harmful substances such as excess of sugar, salt, tobacco, etc. One way to do that is by legislation. And by legislation, we mean taxes. We could, make it, we could add a sugar tax or soda tax, or we could tax the beverage itself or the portion size. For example, the bigger size the tins may be taxed more. All of this has been tried in some countries, variable degrees of success, and they all come under endocrine hygiene. Of course, we could simply go overboard, and that there is India is a country where things can often tend to go overboard. People go too much in the direction of natural and all that, and that can mean a disastrous thing for some people. It's the idea is to draw a line that separates the right from the wrong, and it's not as easy as making a slide and showing it like that. It's a very difficult process, and that requires continuous education by professional bodies as well as individual doctors of the public. Next, after diet is the physical activity. We have two kinds of which one is the conventional one, aerobics, weight training, HIIT and all that. And the second one is yoga, which is a bigger concept. Just like endocrinology is a smaller concept than endocrine hygiene, yoga is a bigger concept than merely exercise. It involves a lot more other things. And that is also something we can promote. One of the key components of physical activity is to move away from just individual responsibility to just walk or do physical activity. There have been walkability studies in Indian cities which find that by simple tweaks to the environment, this is a walkability study done in an Indian city, we can see that by removing the crowding in the sidewalks or making the place better for walking, the amount of walking that the people did as tracked by their Google Fit data dramatically improved by simply extending the footpath by 1.5 feet. That is the power of taking endocrine hygiene and implementing it on a public scale. Apart from physical activity and diet, sleep plays a very important role. And one of the things that disturbs sleep is the noise itself. Noise pollution has been around for a very long time. And what is new is that noise pollution has been found to have significant effect on endocrine system, including affecting sperm production. So, for all the guys who are watching this, you know what to do. Now, this is the beautiful city of Paris at night. Although it looks beautiful to us, it carries with it a grave danger. Paris la nuit it's basically Paris at night. It carries with it a grave danger, and that danger is light pollution. Unlike sound pollution or noise pollution, light pollution is not very well known, and it causes huge damage to the hormones, messing up with melatonin, cortisol, and growth hormone, and all sorts of things, and eventually leading to increased risk of diabetes, obesity, and cancers. So we need to ensure that nighttime is sleep time, no devices in bedroom. There are a number of things that we can do. The simple thing to remember is that nighttime is basically sleep time. Coming to the social aspects of endocrine hygiene, I will start with this frogs there. Nothing great about this, but the sad story about this frog is that it was born as a boy and it became a girl. Now, since frogs do not have endocrinologists among them and they don't do gender reassignment surgeries, one would wonder how on earth did this happen? It turns out that the frogs had access or they were, in a way poisoned with atrazine, which is an endocrine disrupting chemical that is all around the place, and it's a very common chemical, and that leads to change in gender of the frogs. So this endocrine disrupting chemical turns a male frog into a female frog, and unfortunately, these kinds of endocrine disrupting chemicals are all over the place. There are thousands and thousands of them, and there is almost no way to avoid them. There are two things in the world which are omnipresent. One is God, the other is the endocrine disrupting chemical. Consequently, we cannot say, okay, today I'm going to get up and go and avoid endocrine disrupting chemicals. The only thing is to try and avoid things that we come in contact with to be not damaging to our endocrine system. So to sum up, endocrine hygiene is a very vast, broad concept that has physical, mental, and social dimensions, including what we eat, what we breathe, how we sleep, how we live on a day-to-day life, what we see as screen time, how we feel as in stress management, and how we as a society handle some of the things that affect human life. This includes endocrine disrupting chemicals and sunlight exposure as well. So, such a broad concept is almost impossible to be handled by one particular group of specialists, be it endocrinologists, be it politicians, clergymen, or anything for that matter. So, ultimately, endocrine hygiene is relevant everywhere and it affects every single person, not just person. As I showed you, it even affects the poor male frogs and turns them into female frogs. Therefore, the thing to remember is that even though it affects everything and everyone, it's everywhere, these kind of things can make you wonder, okay, it's not my job, it's someone else's job. It is that politician's job, it is that administrator's job, it is that policymaker's job, it is that industrialist's job, it is that chemist's job, and so on and so forth. The true thing is to avoid passing the buck and to take ownership of this condition. And I am particularly proud and happy that Endocrine Society of India has taken ownership of this condition and is doing its job to promote more and more uh, awareness about endocrine hygiene. And with that, I would say someone else's job. It is that politician's job. Thank you so much.